Welcome to EPG Pathshala. We are discussing today a module on social policy. The specific module that we will discuss today is food security. Food security, as the name suggests, is an issue of great concern for societies and nation states in the modern context. Inability to obtain sufficient quantities of safe and nutritious food to meet nutritional requirement and sometimes even physical survival by a large number of people in the world, especially in poorer communities in Asia and sub-Saharan African context, is often a cause of great consternation and shame for nations all over the world because we live in times of apparent plenty. The existence of food insecurity is indicated by high levels of undernourishment among population groups in many parts of the world. Prevalence of food security and hunger, surprisingly, in today's world can coexist with high levels of economic prosperity. What it highlights, therefore, is the existence of a great deal of societal inequality. And this is why food security is a social policy issue. The objectives of this module. In this module, the students will learn about the concepts and definitions of food security, the causes and consequences of food insecurity, the measures taken by national governments to address the situation, and why food security is conceptualized as not just a democratic right but also a human right. Let's look at a standard definition of food security that comes from FAO, Food and Agricultural Organization. Food security at the individual, household, national, regional, and global levels is achieved when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. As the definition suggests, food security must be understood, evaluated, assessed, and monitored at different levels. At the level of individuals, at the level of households, as well as national, regional, and global level. There are various dimensions of the term food security. Emerging from the World Food Summit in 1996, it is usually defined in terms of 4 dimensions: availability, access, stabilization, and utilization. Let's understand what each of these terms mean. Availability tends to refer to physical availability of food stocks, and this is usually associated with food production, stocks of food, trade in food, food surpluses, and such types of actual availability of food grains or food stocks in any particular context. Economic and physical access determines the access dimension of food security. This is associated with incomes, expenditures, markets, and prices. As the term suggests, there may be, even if there is excessive availability of food or physical availability is not an issue, economic and physical access to food might become an issue if people's incomes fall below a certain level, or if people are not being able to consume sufficient amounts of quality food because of illness or other forms of deprivations. Food utilization is the third dimension, and it includes issues such as caring and feeding practices, intra-household allocation of food, and dietary diversity. What it essentially means is, despite having physical availability of food and while having economic access to food, there may not be sufficient utilization of food by individuals and groups due to various other factors which might lead to food insecurity despite there being economic and physical access. The fourth dimension refers to the stability of the first 3 dimensions over time, which essentially suggests that groups, individuals, households, nations, and so on may be food secure at a point in time, and then later on they might become food insecure. So essentially one needs to assure that access, availability, utilization prevails over an entire period of time. Food security crisis. The IPC is a classification system for food security crisis based on a range of livelihood needs, and it has created a number of indicators to try and understand the level, extent, prevalence, and the depth of food insecurity in different parts of the world. These indicators include crude mortality rate, malnutrition prevalence, food access and availability, dietary diversity, the availability of improved sources of water and sanitation, the different coping strategies and livelihood assets that people may have. A combination of these indicators and the manner in which these indicators can be seen in different societies help policymakers and analysts to determine whether a society is food secure or food insecure. What are the various causes of food insecurity? Broadly, food insecurity may be attributed to natural causes, for example, natural disasters like floods or agricultural droughts or climate change. Food security can also be attributed to social and economic inequalities, which means that while an entire population may be food secure, certain sections of the population may not be able to access food. Political inequality may also lead to food insecurity. Economic shocks might result in rising price of food or lowering incomes or loss of jobs or deteriorating livelihoods because of environmental degradation, all of which might constitute food insecurity for certain people and population groups. Food price inflation in the contemporary context is another reason why food might become unaffordable for people and hence leading to food insecurity. Wars and violent conflicts have also created food insecurity for a large number of people in present time. Can food insecurity situations translate into famines? What is a famine? A famine can be described as a widespread and long-term disruption in access to food, resulting in severe malnutrition and mass mortality unless alternative supplies of food are made available. Food crises become famines, according to one author, when three interrelated factors coincide. And the way to measure this is when 20% of households in a particular area face extreme food shortage, more than 30% of the population are acutely malnourished, and more than 2 people out of 10,000 die every day. When all these factors coincide, food insecurity situations are said to have moved on to something even more catastrophic, and which is a famine. However, since the middle of 20th century till now, we seem to have created a situation in the world whereby we can safely say that famines no longer take place, and at least that's what some optimistic observers have documented. In the century between 1870 to 1969, however, famine-related hungers were far more common, and it led to an estimated number of 140 million people in the world dying of food insecurity related reasons. 45 great famines are recorded during this period that led to more than 100,000 people dying for each, or more than that, in each of these famine episodes. Between 1970 to 1980, 5.4 million people died in famines. This is a great deal lesser than what used to happen in the world that came before. And the two famines which led to millions of people dying was located in Cambodia and Ethiopia, and they were both related to authoritarian regimes and situations of war and conflict. Since the 1980s, there has been only 6 great famines in which 1.4 million people have died. To some extent, for some commentators, humanity has been able to address the issue of famines, and somehow we have been able to prevent food insecurity situations from translated into greater catastrophes such as famine, leading to high levels of mortality in the world. If you look at this graph, which is also from the same publication, deaths from famines in the year from 1870 to 2010 have been declining overall, and with some specific peaks at certain point, which shows serious famines that happened. If you look at the 1940s and you see the peak around 1943, that possibly represents the Great Bengal famine, which led to the death of close to 3 million people in India. The reasons why famine ended. A complex combination of reasons underpin the decline of famines through the 20th and 21st century. Famines did not just end because it went somewhere else. It ended primarily because of state intervention and concerted cooperation across nations all over the world. Some of the reasons why famines reduced in intensity and number and are very rare nowadays, except in the context of war and conflict, is because of increase in agricultural productivity, which has led to the ability to grow large amounts of food grain. Also increasing in global incomes, which has meant that more and more people are able to purchase the food and are not impeded from having economic access to food. Better coverage of immunization has meant that utilization of food by children and others have increased, because if you're unwell and ill and suffering from a range of infectious diseases, you are often not able to properly utilize the nutritional components of your diet. Primary healthcare measures and the way they have spread all around the world has also enabled people to increase the dimension of utilization. Water and sanitation facilities have also added to improvement in public health. Most importantly, and that's why we have capitalized the last two items, the expansion of democratic rights and the free press have been the two reasons why food crises do not necessarily translate into acute starvation, mortality, and famines. More than food supply issues, in the past, colonialism, wars, conflict, and authoritarian regimes have caused millions of famine deaths, and therefore political reasons for why people suffer from insecurity remains as important, and if not more, than other reasons, natural causes such as agricultural productivity and so on. To understand famines, we must refer to the most influential theory of the 20th century, which is the economist Amartya Sen's entitlement theory. The entitlement approach to understanding starvation and famines suggests that hunger and starvation must be understood by foregrounding the ability of people to command food using legal means available in any society. When the entitlement theory was first proposed by Sen in the 1980s with the publication of the work Poverty and Famines, this revolutionized the understanding of famines, because till then famine causation was primarily related to the availability or non-availability of food, whereas the entitlement theory adds the second dimension to, if you remember the food security definition, is even if there's physical availability of food, people may not have economic access to food. Among the means available in any society, Sen includes production, trade, entitlements from the state. Individual starvation, according to Sen, was the result of the inability of people to command food using all the legal means such as production, trade, and entitlements from the state. Sen describes this as a failure of entitlement to unbundle with enough food. The implications of the entitlement theory is that the catastrophic consequences of crop failure are not perhaps distributed equally in a society. Say, for example, in a particular season of drought, the crop production in an entire region or even a nation fails. But that does not necessarily mean that the consequences of crop failure would lead to hunger for every individual or every group in society. Some groups, such as poorer people and landless agricultural laborers, for example, may see their entitlements shrink dramatically because of their high dependence on perhaps self-production of food or agricultural work as means of making a living, leading to loss of command over food, and hence they might succumb to starvation. In every major famine since the Second World War, there was enough food in the region at that time to feed the population, including the Bengal famine. The poor, however, simply could not afford it. When an individual or household is exposed to a number of external hazards such as drought, conflict, and economic shocks, their ability to earn an income decreases, increasing their vulnerability to hunger. And now I hope you realize why where social policy is concerned to fill or bridge what kind of gap. It is essentially about creating entitlements wherever they have disappeared, or creating entitlements to food for those groups of population who are at most risk of suffering from starvation in the event of food crisis. Social provisions. Social policy measures can create what Sen describes as exchange entitlements that preserve people's command over food even when they are affected by broader macroeconomic shocks or natural disasters. Examples of such measures would be unemployment benefits, subsidized food transfers to the poor, public works program, guaranteed employment by the state, or emergency relief of food during humanitarian crisis. Public action is another key determinant of whether food crisis translates into famine. If you remember the causes of food insecurity that we had listed, we had spoken about democratic participation and press freedom. Public action by concerned individuals and civil society groups and newspapers campaigns have been instrumental in drawing the attention of the public and nation state on the widespread issue of hunger and undernutrition in the country, in India and elsewhere in the world, but especially in India. And they have also highlighted the ineffectiveness of existing social safety nets to deal with the situation. The use of public interest litigation by the Right to Food campaigners, for example, provided the impetus to create public awareness and concerted state action over a large number of people who died in starvation in early 2000. Among the landmark litigation is the civil writ petition 196 that was filed by PUCL Rajasthan in 2001, in which a case was made against the Government of India, the Food Corporation of India, and 6 state governments for violating the right to life. The focus of public action in 2001, the focus was on the failure of the targeted public distribution system and inadequate drought response by the state governments, which violated people's right to food and, in extension, their right to life. The first interim order of the Supreme Court in response to the PIL was issued in November 2001. This focused on 8 existing welfare schemes and converted the provisions under each of these social programs, which were simply targeted food or cash transfers, into legal entitlements. Food transfers through the public distribution system, and Antyodaya Anna Yojana (AAY), National Program of Nutritional Support to Primary Education or Midday Meal, and the Integrated Child Development Services (ICDS) and Annapurna food transfers to the elderly. Cash transfers under the NECP that we discussed yesterday was another example of how the Supreme Court interpreted the violation of right to life, and therefore asked the government to convert social programs into legal entitlements in order to maintain food security of the citizens in the country. In the coming years, public action, campaigning in the press, and a whole lot of other types of activism led to the implementation and the enactment of the National Food Security Act in 2013. The Government of India passed the National Food Security Act, which was designed to ensure adequate food at affordable prices to all citizens of the country. To address the problem of persistent and high levels of hunger and malnutrition, the Act entitles 2/3 of India's population, who are considered to be vulnerable to food insecurity, to 5 kilograms of rice, wheat, or coarse grain per person per month at a subsidized price. The Act provides for the coverage of up to 75% of rural population and up to 50% of the urban population for receiving subsidized food grains under targeted public distribution system. The eligible persons will be entitled to receive 5 kilograms of food grains per person per month at a subsidized rate of rupees 3, rupees 2 and rupees 1 per kg. The existing Antoday Anna Yojana AAY households, which constitute the poorest of the poor, will continue to receive 35 kg of food grains per household per month. The National Food Security Act is considered to be one of the landmark legislations in the country which guarantees people's right to food, and the idea is to reduce the extent of hunger and malnourishment which continues to prevail in the country despite our very effective measures to deal with famine. Post-independent India, in fact, has never seen a famine-like situation. Famines in India are usually attributed to the colonial regime and to the 19th century past. The National Food Security Act has a special focus on the nutritional support to women and children, besides meals to pregnant women and lactating mothers during pregnancy and 6 months after the childbirth. Such women are also entitled to receive maternity benefit of no less than rupees 6,000 from the government. Children up to 14 years of age are also entitled to have nutritious school meals. The Act contains provisions also to set up grievance redressal mechanisms at the district and the state level, and separate provision has been made to create transparency and accountability in ensuring that the provisions under the Act actually reach the people for whom it is intended. One of the key welfare programs that India has always had, even prior to the enactment of the National Food Security Act, is the public distribution system. The public distribution system in the country provides access to subsidized food. The idea was to protect, when the scheme came into being in the 1990s, the idea was to protect the general population against food shortages and price fluctuations. Over a period of time, the program grew in importance but changed its focus from providing all citizens from price fluctuations to targeting it towards the poorest of the poor and ensuring that their basic food needs are met. The distribution of food grains is always at an affordable price from the fair price shops under the public distribution system. Under the targeted public distribution system, a specific quantity of food grain at a subsidized cost is made available to eligible identified families of poorer households. The eligible families hold ration cards or PDS cards and are divided into 4 categories. The white card holders are families whose annual income is above rupees 100,000. The saffron card holders are above poverty line or APL households whose annual income is below 100,000 but above 15,000 per annum. And yellow card holders are below poverty line families whose family income is below rupees 15,000 per annum. If you remember the discussion, these cut-off lines, these annual income are linked to the national and state poverty lines. And if you remember our discussion in the module on poverty, where we spoke about how people in the country are described as being poor or not being poor, depending upon whether they come above or below a poverty threshold that is being created by the government. People with no visible means of livelihood and the poorest of the poor are provided with a special type of card, apart from the 4 categories that we mentioned above. These are called the Antoday cards. The TPDS does not serve white card holders who are considered to be above poverty line. The Antoday BPL and APL card holders are eligible for the subsidized grain food transfers through the PDS. Despite the widespread popularity of the PDS among rural poor, the critics have pointed out the various shortcomings of the program, such as very different performance in different states. Not in all states have the PDS been successful in creating the food transfers to reduce food insecurity. There has also been great inefficiencies in the distribution of food grains. There has been leakages and accusations of corruption. There has been various inclusion and exclusion errors, which mean that households which are actually poor have not received the identity cards, which would have made them eligible, whereas households which are above poverty line have utilized the benefit. There has been the problem of elite capture, which has meant that wealthier or better off households have been better able to utilize the food transfer than the people for whom the program is actually meant. Misappropriation of resources, inaccurate or non-identification of beneficiaries, and all of this has led to very limited impact on the poorest. The others, however, based on a large number of empirical studies, have argued for the positive nutritional and food security effects of the PDS wherever the system is functional. So the idea, therefore, is to make a really good idea work even better by making the PDS more accountable and more transparent and more efficient so that it can fulfill its task of ensuring food security for the poorest. Recent evidence has shown the revival of PDS in many states, and that has underscored the considerable effects that a broad-based and functioning PDS can have on rural poverty, essentially through implicit income transfer and by adding stability to insecure incomes of a large number of rural households who depend on casual wage labor for their living. Essentially, if the poorest whose incomes are highly variable can obtain a large share of their monthly food needs through the transfer of subsidized food grains by the PDS, then they can save a large share of their incomes for other essential needs, and that essentially adds to the not just to the food security but also to the overall goal of poverty reduction in the country. Food security is also part of the Sustainable Development Goal to end hunger. On September 2015, governments of all over the world have signed up for the SDG Goal 2, which is ending hunger, achieving food security, and improving nutrition and promoting sustainable agriculture and ending world hunger by 2030. While humanity has been able to abolish food crisis leading to widespread hunger and famines in which hundreds and thousands of people have perished historically, abolishing endemic hunger and malnutrition is likely to be more challenging unless better policy measures are undertaken, not just in the area of social policy, but also agriculture, nutrition, and poverty reduction through the right kinds of economic policy in general. With nearly 195 million undernourished people in the world, India shares a quarter of the global hunger burden. Nearly 47 million, or 4 out of 10 children in India, are not meeting their full human potential because of chronic undernutrition or stunting. According to UN report from where this information has been extracted, stunting has consequences such as diminished learning capacity, poor school performance, reduced earnings when the children grow up to be adults, and increased risk of chronic diseases. These impacts are multi-generational, and girls and women are also suffering from the broader prevalence of malnutrition, and they often give birth to low birth weight infants. There has also been an increase in prevalence of overweight and obesity in children and adolescents in India, which has lifelong consequences, which suggests that food insecurity, one needs to add the dimension of nutrition security to food security. The government has large food security and anti-poverty programs, but there are critical gaps in terms of inclusion and exclusion errors as mentioned. Despite the achievement in national food sufficiency, therefore, there is need for concerted action in agriculture, land development, and to address environmental degradation in order to ensure that food security can be maintained for the present and future generations. In this module, we have learned about the meaning and definition of the concept of food security. We have learnt about the various causes because of which food insecurity occurs. We have tried to understand the situations and conditions under which widespread food insecurity can translate into catastrophes like famines. We have tried to look at why famines are caused and why famines are declining in modern world. We have tried to understand why food security is a social policy concern in many parts of the world, but especially in India, where we have a great deal of food self-sufficiency at the national level, but high levels of hunger and malnutrition persists in the wider society. We have looked at specific social programs implemented by Government of India to address the issue of endemic hunger. Within this, we have especially looked at the public distribution system. We have also referred to school meals and nutrition programs. We have looked at how public action and free press and democracy can lead to concerted action towards making food security a great concern for national governments. In case of India, the Campaign for Right to Food led to the enactment of the National Food Security Act in 2013. I hope you enjoyed participating in this module, and I would ask you to look at the readings and references which are provided at the end of this module for future learnings in this area. Thank you.